Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Tune Up here on Passion for Sound. As always, I want to start with a huge thanks to channel sponsor Linsol for making this series of videos possible. If you're not familiar with Linsol, they're an online retailer of all sorts of audio gear. I'll put a link to them down in the description below. If you're looking for IEMs, DACs, headphone amps, etc., check out their link, go through, see what they have to offer. And if you want to say thank you to them for making this series of videos possible, for supporting Passion for Sound and making all of my reviews possible, then do consider a purchase from them next time you're in the market for some audio gear. Before I get into the albums for this episode, the other thing I want to mention is that some of you have asked if I can put clips of the music I'm talking about within these actual videos. And the answer is that I've tried that, but unfortunately, even if I keep the clips really short, YouTube pings them and I get copyright warnings on them. So apologies that I can't share the audio that I'm talking about here. I wish I could, it would really add to the videos. So apologies that at the moment I can't share clips of the audio within the actual recordings. Perhaps in the future, if we can get some more views on these videos, then I can demonetize them and not make any money out of the video itself, and therefore can share the audio with you because the copyright won't matter then. If we can do that, that would be fantastic. I'd love to share the audio clips with you. But in the short term, I'm just going to have to talk about them, and I've got links in the description down below where you can click through and check them out for yourself. And so with that said, let's jump into the albums for this episode. I should say thank you to all of those that have made suggestions for this format, how I might tweak it and evolve it over time. And so in this episode, I am continuing the trend of using one new release album and then also an album of my choosing. But in future episodes, I might mix things up a bit. We might do some genre-based albums, like a top 5 blues albums for audiophiles, something like that. So do stay tuned, it's going to change a little bit, but for now let's talk about 2 different albums, or actually technically 4, you'll see what I mean shortly, and we're going to kick this off with the new release. When I went hunting for a new release album that I thought was worthy of conversation for this episode, I happened to stumble across this album by Burt Bacharach and Elvis Costello. The album itself is called The Songs of Bacharach and Costello, and I chose this album for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I've always loved their collaboration album, Painted from Memory, and this album actually captures the songs from that album and adds extras that these two have written together. And the other reason was to highlight the musicianship of Burt Bacharach. He actually died this year, and I didn't realise this till I saw this album. He died this year in February of 2023, this is. And this particular album, by coincidence, was released 1 month after his death. If you're not familiar with Burt Bacharach, he's an incredibly prolific songwriter. Over his very long career, he had 73 US hits in the top 40 and 52 UK hits in their top 40. So it's a massive catalogue of amazing songs. Some of them are a bit dated and old-fashioned now, but he's continued to write music that's excellent right throughout his career. My first real exposure to the combination of Burt Bacharach and Elvis Costello came with the 1998 album Painted from Memory, as I've already mentioned. And essentially what you're listening to when you're getting an album by Burt Bacharach and Elvis Costello is what I would call orchestrated pop ballads. In other words, there's a full orchestra behind them, they're mostly ballads, and they've got a general sort of light pop feel. This album, much like Painted from Memory, which makes up the first third of this album's got what I would call emotional tracks. They're not kitsch, they're not kind of soppy tracks, but there's definitely depth of emotion in them. There's a lot of heartbreak, there's a lot of stories around relationships and the breakdown of relationships, but it's all done in a very tasteful way. It's honest, it's open, and it's vulnerable, but it's not kind of tacky in any way, I think. And that's what I really appreciate about this combo. As you move through the album, generally speaking, production quality is very good. I don't know if it's quite audiophile reference level, but there are some nicely recorded tracks in there. And what's quite interesting is you can really hear the difference between disc 1, which was one set of recordings for Painted from Memory, and disc 2, which is another studio recording of some newer tracks. The recording on disc 2 is a bit more intimate sounding, but it's also a little bit clearer, a bit more immediate, and a bit more present. And so I can see people leaning maybe towards using some tracks from disc 2 for testing their systems, potentially. But as I said, I don't see this as a reference album for recording quality so much as just a good recording. And then when we get to disc 3, that's all live recordings, so that actually varies from one venue to the next. Depending on where each track was recorded, and it says all this in the actual information on the tracks on the albums, depending on where it was recorded, you get quite a different experience, and that's fun too. You can go through and almost hear the difference in the venues, the size of the venue, the way it was recorded, you can hear the variations. And so let me run through now a few standout tracks from the Songs of Bacharach and Costello, and I'm going to start with a few from the first album. These have been favourites of mine since Painted from Memory, and they continue to be favourites on this album too. Specifically, it's tracks 3, 4 and 12, and those tracks are I Still Have That Other Girl, This House Is Empty Now, and God Give Me Strength. All three of these, as I've already mentioned, are quite emotional songs. They're about the ends of relationship and loneliness after relationships. Not the most uplifting songs, but they're beautiful songs at the same time. In particular, God Give Me Strength is, for me at least, one of the strongest and most vulnerable and open kind of heartbreak, breakup type songs I think I've ever heard. It's one of my all-time favourites for that sort of style of song. When we move over to disc 2, one of the tracks that I liked on that was track 4, and that's called Everyone's Playing House. The reason this one stood out to me was based on the recording quality. As I said before, it's quite an intimate recording, so the vocal comes quite close to you, but on a nice pair of speakers, there's a lovely sense of soundstage and image separation that produces a lovely sense of soundscape. And then finally, if we move over to disc 3, which is the live recordings, features a number of different artists as well. And the ones that stood out to me the most were the songs including Audra May. Audra May is the great niece of Judy Garland, and while she doesn't sound particularly like Judy Garland, she's clearly got a fantastic voice. And so this album's introduced me to another artist I'm going to be exploring more in the future. I may share here on the Tune Up for you. But those are some standout tracks for me from this album, and I'm going to leave it there so you can go and explore it for yourself and find your own favourites. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. It's quite a journey going through it, being 3 full albums, but I think it's a journey worth taking, particularly if you'd maybe forgotten about Burt Bacharach or you've never been introduced to him before. I hope you enjoy all of it. The lyrics are fantastic too, and as always, let me know in the comments if you like it, if you don't like it, what your favourite standouts are, etc. If you're trying to work out what piece of gear you should buy next, then the Passion for Sounds Recommends database might be helpful for you. In the description box of every single video, just down here, you'll find the Passion for Sounds Recommends section. If you click on this link, it'll take you through to the Passion for Sounds Recommends Airtable database. What you'll see in here is every single product that I've ever reviewed and recommend, in some cases products that I own but maybe haven't reviewed but recommend. And then once you're in here, you can use the filter button up here to decide to filter by things like whether or not the product type is for a headphone, for example. So maybe you're looking for a headphone. Filter it by that, and you can now see every headphone I recommend. You can sort it by price, which is the default sorting, or any other sorting method that you want. And then once you've got the list of products you're looking for, you've got the links to the reviews of the products, and then also purchasing links for global retailers and also regional retailers for the US, Australia, Canada, and the UK. So feel free to play around with this, sort it, filter it however you want to. It won't affect what anybody else sees, and you can hopefully find just the right products for you. I hope this is helpful, and now let's get back to the review. And so now moving on from the new release, let's talk about the album of my choosing, or in this case we've got albums. And these aren't particularly old, but it's a suite of 3 albums. There's soon to be a 4th, I believe, and I say soon, I don't know when exactly. But the albums I'm talking about is Djesse Volume 1, Volume 2 and Volume 3, and they're all by Jacob Collier. Volume 1 of this series was released in 2018, Volume 2 in 2019, Volume 3 in 2020, but then we've had this bit of a hiatus while we're waiting for Volume 4. Reading around on the internet, I do believe it's meant to still be coming, and I think it's going to include some of the touring and some of the concerts that he's been doing, maybe some live recordings from those. And so I'm not sure if maybe it was slowed down by COVID and the inability to tour and have concerts, but fingers crossed we will get a Volume 4 soon. All 3 of these albums have been produced by Jacob Collier, and I have to say, not only is he a gifted musician, he's also a pretty great producer too. The combination of musicianship and recording quality, guest musicians, etc. across the board makes for some fantastic listening. And if you're not familiar with Jacob Collier, he started out as essentially a YouTube kind of phenomenon. He was uploading videos to YouTube of him singing, playing. He's a multi-instrumentalist and somewhat of a musical prodigy. The reason for that is he's unafraid of trying out different things. He uses different harmonies than he used to, but he also blends that with different musical styles, blending different genres together at times. He's very unafraid, very exploratory, but what I love about him is he's also very accessible. Sometimes exploratory music can get very hard to relate to, and you kind of have to work at it. Whereas I find with Jacob Collier's music, it's easy to listen to if you just want to sit back and enjoy it. But if you want to start listening into it, you can also hear how technically impressive some of the kind of the theory behind the music and the construction of the music actually is. And I'll talk more about that as I go through a couple of standout tracks, but it even shows up in the overall album structures. And that's to say that listening to these albums, whether you listen to just one of them or all 3 of them, is a musical journey. Each album takes you through different genres, different styles, different kind of layers of music. It's a very impressive listen. One of the thoughts that jumped to my mind as I listened to these albums was it's almost like if you took, say, Brian Wilson or the Beach Boys, and you merged that with a little bit of Stevie Wonder, and then even a little bit of something like Parliament and George Clinton. There's a little bit of everything mixed in there. There's some orchestral stuff, there's some a cappella stuff, there's just a huge range of musical styles, genres, and sounds. As I've already mentioned, there's also a bunch of different collaborators across the albums, so there's a lot to take in, and it's one of those albums that rewards me every time I go back and listen. I hear something different and new. And so let me jump in now and highlight a few standouts for you, both in terms of highlighting some tracks I really love, but also some tracks that you could jump to get a sense of the range that this album or this series of albums can offer. I think a track that kind of sums up the whole experience of volumes 1, 2 and 3 of Djesse is track 3 on the first album. This is called With Love in My Heart, and it blends between having African rhythms, having some slow funk. This is where I mentioned George Clinton as a potential influence before. It brings in some 80s style synths that are a little bit like what you might have heard on, say, Conversation Piece by Stevie Wonder. There's a full orchestral backing here as well. And then the vocal arrangements are complex and multi-layered harmonies. So it kind of encapsulates everything you can expect to hear if you listen to the rest of Djesse Volume 1, 2, 3. Moving on then to the 5th track of the first album, which is called Djesse, as in the track is called Djesse as well. And this one's got an orchestral and theatrical sound. It sounds like it would be completely at home in the middle of a high-quality musical theatre performance. And I mean that in a good way for those of you that might cringe at musical theatre. The 8th track on the first album, called Once You, sounds just like a Nat King Cole standard. So it's the sweeping orchestrations of a generally smooth and cruisy jazz track. And then if we move on to Volume 2 and the second track, which is called Sky Above, this one begins like a slow acoustic folk number, but ends with African rhythms, some Irish or Scottish pipes, some synth funk sounds. It's just a mixing pot of everything, but it somehow all comes together properly. Track 5 on the second album, which is Moon River, it's his take on Moon River, so the original jazz standard. That sounds a bit like you've handed Moon River to a group like the Beach Boys or Manhattan Transfer. You've got these amazing layered vocals that Jacob Collier is so good at. But it's also not just a cappella, it builds and grows into quite a magnificent orchestration of the song. And then I can't finish talking about album 2 without mentioning track 10 called It Don't Matter. This one is fantastic for testing systems in my opinion. There's lots of sounds spaced out around the soundstage, excellent sense of clarity and articulation in the recording. It's just a wonder to listen to on a fantastic system. The final track I'll mention is track 4 on the third album, and that's called Time Alone With You. And that's a cool kind of funky, jazzy, multi-layered vocal track that again shows you everything that Jacob Collier is capable of. And indeed, Volume 3 of these albums does kind of stick a little bit more to that one space for me. It's not a bad album by any stretch, but I feel like it's got less of a journey within it than albums 1 and 2. Some will find it more coherent because of that. Others will find it less of a journey. I'm going to leave that one up to you. Let me know in the comments, of course. But for me, Volume 3 kind of sticks closer to that, almost that Stevie Wonder sound, as I mentioned before, back in his era of, say, Conversation Piece. It's got a little bit of that synthy, Stevie Wonder sort of sound. And I have to say that as much as I love and adore and respect Stevie Wonder, I felt like when he went into that sound, it got a little bit less, I don't know what the word is, it didn't go tacky, but it was less kind of authentic sounding to me. His music in that era didn't grab me, it didn't resonate as much with me. I still love the content of it, but not so much the sound of it. And that's where I think Jacob Collier has done a wonderful job of picking up some of that synthy sound without letting the music get tacky. Occasionally it goes just a little bit too far for me on this album, but not very often. And so for me, Djesse Volumes 1, 2 and 3 all get high recommendations as a suite of albums. As I said before, I think they're a wonderful musical journey, and hopefully I've introduced you to something that you're going to enjoy as much as I have. As always, I welcome your comments and thoughts on these albums if you do take a listen to them, or if you already know them. Drop me a comment down below, tell me your favourite tracks, what you enjoy about them. Maybe tell me some other albums that you think are similar to this, if you know of any. Whether we're talking about the Burt Bacharach album, or we're talking about the Jacob Collier albums. But for now, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Tune Up. As I said before, the next episode might look a little bit different. It's still going to be all about music, but I might change the format slightly. And so if you have enjoyed this episode and you're enjoying the series in general, please make sure you hit the like button. Tell me that you're enjoying it. Tell me that you want me to keep it going. And I mean by pressing the like button. And if you want me to be able to keep doing this, if you want me to start adding in the musical clips as well, then maybe help me out, and if you are looking to buy something in the near future, use the link from Linsol down below. The more indirect income that I can generate from these videos through things like that link down below, and also the sponsorship from Linsol, the more of that I can generate, the more time I can dedicate to producing videos like this one, and the less I have to rely on things like the YouTube ads to make it worth my while to steal time from my day job to make these videos possible. I'd love to get to a point where I can just pour out bunches and bunches of this content for you if you're finding it helpful, but I'll need your help to get there. So hit the like button, use the link down below if you're looking to make a purchase, and hopefully I can get to the point where I can make this exactly what you want it to be. But for now, let me leave it to the music. I hope you enjoy listening to one or all of these albums. And so happy listening, and I look forward to seeing you here next time on Passion for Sound.